Batra Daf, Samagima, starting from Amud Bet, around 5 lines down. Pshita, it's obvious. Amari Yahlok Ploni bin Nechasai. If a guy tells someone else, let so and so, let Reuven split my possessions, Yahlok, Palga is referring to half. Then Helek Ploni bin Nechasai. What if he says give him a portion, a share, a chelek? Is that half or not? Marabina Barkisi Tashmad Halacha is Tanya Amar Tinu Helek Ploni border. Someone tells his friend, give a share of my pit, a chelek, to my to so and so. Simchu says en pachut meravia. That's referring to a quarter, because since chelek, a share, means either a half or less, we give in between that, right? And that's what we're going to see now. A few cases, whenever there's a doubt, a safek about how much a person wants to give, he gives a very ambiguous, unclear term. We take the minimum and the maximum, we go in half. The minimum is 0, maximum is over here half. So therefore, the guy over here gets half of that, which is a quarter. Similarly, if someone tells his friend, give him enough water for the barrel, which is referring to a quarter of the pit, so a half of a quarter, because again, we're going in doubt, we're going from 0 to a quarter, therefore it's an eighth of the pit. Liktira for his water for a pot, and bahut miyud bet is a 12th of the pit, because over here it's referring to a third of the pit, and that's how much is needed for water in a pot, and a quarter of that is a 12th. Okay, let's be honest. If he says give him enough water for a cup, and bahut mishasa, that is a quarter of a quarter, which is also known as a 16th. Okay, so we're done. Ben Levi Shemachas Israel, Levi sold the field to Israel, and he told him, Al Minat Shemaaser Rishon Shali. Right, so Levi selling, Mr. Levi is selling a field to Reuben, and he says, Reuben, I'm selling you this field, but I want to have access still to the Maaser Rishon. Maaser Rishon is the Maaser that a Levi gets from Israel's fruits. So you tell him, I'm giving it to you, but I get the Maaser. Maaser Rishon is that it's a good transaction, and he gets access to it. If the guy mentioned Li Ubanai, I want the Maaser Rishon for me and my children, yani after he dies, Met Nitin Ubanai. If he dies, it goes to his kids. But if he told them, as long as the field is in your possession, right now it's in your possession, I want it to continue that way. If once Reuben sells it to Shimon, even if he buys it back from Shimon, that already got cut off, and the Maaser Rishon does not go back to him. So the Gemara says, Damai. The Quran asks the question, how does the Maaser Rishon still get access back to Mr. Levi in the first few cases? Can you acquire something that does not exist yet? So according to an opinion, off the top of my head, I believe it's Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yochanan, that you cannot acquire something that does not exist yet. So how can he call dibs on the Maaser Rishon if it did not grow yet? Where answer is given once he told him, when he's giving him the condition that I want the Maaser Rishon, the Levi is retaining possession of that amount of the field. So only 10% or whatever the percentage is to get Maaser Rishon, that is the possession of the Levi still in his ownership that he gets access to, but not necessarily acquiring future produce. Zot omeret, we learn from here. You'll see why I stipulated that. Emphasize. Someone sell the house to his friend. I told him, that on condition I'm selling you this house with the rooftop on top with the fence is mine. Is that the rooftop is his. Now, seemingly, that's a repeat, because our Mishnah mentioned that as well, that if you sell a house, if there's a fenced roof on top of 10 tvachim or higher, it's not part of the sale. So what's the hidush? The Gemara says, "My what's halacha?" Razvid says, "She'im ratzal yotzi bazizin motzi." The hidush over here is that if he excludes it specifically for sale, it means he not only has access to the roof, but if he also wants to put beams on top of the roof, he can to stick out. And Rabbi says, "She'im ratzal aliyah born in Rishon, says that if he wants to build a roof, another floor on top of it, he can. Meaning, if the roof collapses, he can rebuild it. Now, the Gemara says, based on Razid, it makes sense according to Razid. That's why Rish Lakish mentioned that the Braita of Levi selling the land while still accessing his Maaser teaches us this Hidush. Because the Hidush is now that I'm able to put beams, otherwise I would think that I can't put beams. And then according to the Papa, the mind is what's the big Hidush according to the Papa? If it mentions the same thing we said before. We mentioned that what? I want to, if it falls down, I could rebuild it. We already know that from the Mishnah. The Gemara says, Kasha. It's a good question. The guy sells a house to his friend. Even if he wrote in the document, I'm selling him the depth and the height of the house. He has to tell him that I have to write it down. I'm selling you the house from the depth of the earth to the height of the sky, and in order to include other things like the pit in the yard. Now, my time why? The veruma pistana lokani, because generally when you're selling a house, you're not selling the pit in the field, and the buyer's not acquiring it. Therefore, when you're writing, I'm telling you the depth and the height of the house. It's just mentioning directly above the house and directly below the house, but not the pit. That's very deep. Therefore, if you want to write, I want to get the pit, you have to write, I'm giving you from the depth of the earth all the way to the sky. The Imam said to bring a proof according to him, because the Mishnah said, the next Mishnah says that if you're selling a house, you don't acquire the water pit or the other pits in the yard. Even if you write that I'm selling you just depth and height of the house. If you think according to against Rav Zibi, that when you're buying a house, you automatically acquire up and down the house. And when you're writing down that I'm acquiring up and down, depth and height, then it should acquire pit and water pit, etc. Therefore, we see the Mishnah obviously holds like Rav Dimi, that you need to specifically write, I'm acquiring from the core of the earth to the height of the sky in order to acquire the pit. I'm trying to bring proof according to Rav Dimi from the next Mishnah. The Gemara says not a good proof. The Mishnah's case where he didn't write depth and height. Maybe according to that Mishnah, if he does write it, you would acquire that without having to write depth of the earth to the depth to the height of the sky. Mishnah specifically said that it wrote depth and height. So maybe it is a proof. Gemara says no. Even if he did not write in the document that you're acquiring from height and depth regularly, it's as if you did write it. But in regarding to, and therefore it's as if you did write it, but it's not good enough to acquire a pit. And in order to acquire a pit in the water pits, you have to write depth and height to acquire above and below. And if you don't write that, you don't acquire the pit. Okay, Mishnah mentioned that if you're selling a house, you don't sell the roof if it has a fencing of 10 tefachim or higher. If you're buying a house, you automatically acquire above and below. What's the difference if it's 10 tefachim high? It should automatically be included in the sale. So we're trying to see from here that that it's against. It's a proof according to Rav Dimi that you don't acquire things up and down even if you write it. The Gemara says no. Everybody would agree with you. Since this roof has 10 tefachim higher fence, hashiv is considered significant and it's considered a hashub in its own right regarding it that it's a separate property and therefore it's not sold, but not necessarily a proof to Rav Dimi. Okay, I'm going to Rabbi Nervashe. Rabbi Nervashe, Tashma. The Marshal Kish told the Merit and Bright told us how Heber the Heber the house to his friend. I told him, I'm I'm selling you on condition the roof with the fence is mine. Do you tell them no, it belongs to him? And we said, ما يخدمات الحدوش بزيد ما الشيء من سبب بزيد بزين مصيبة بامر شيء من سبب لبنت الله قال مهدي. We mentioned the machloket. He mentioned that it teaches you that you're able, if you want to put beams on it, you can. And the Papa says that if you want to rebuild it, he can. Now, if you think that when you're buying a house, you don't acquire the thing on top of it, well, you need a condition in order to exclude the roof on top. You shouldn't acquire it regardless. The Gemara says no. The hidush is no. That's exactly the point. By writing it down, he excluded the roof that if it falls down, I can rebuild it according to the Papa. Okay, new Mishnah. A guy when he sells the house does not sell the pit or the water pit, like we just mentioned with the sale. Even if I wrote in the document, I'm selling you depth and height. But now the seller, if he did not exclude the water pit, he has to buy a path to the pit from the buyer. We did a Rekiva. That's what Rekiva holds. Because Rekiva holds that when you sell something in completion. But Hamim say, the seller does not have to buy it. Because if he's selling it to him, if I'm keeping the water pit, I'm obviously keeping myself a path to get to it. Rabbi Kiva would agree. There's one when the seller specifically said, I'm selling you this except for the water pit. He obviously does not need to buy the path because he's specifically leaving himself a path. So meaning Rabbi Kiva usually holds that if I exclude something without saying it, meaning I'm selling you the house, but in general, the water pit does not get sold with it, then I have to buy a pit, I have to buy a path. Because I didn't have that in mind. But if I specifically mentioned in the document, I'm not selling you this pit, then I am leaving myself a path. I don't have to buy it from you. Let's say you sold the pit the opposite way. Instead of selling the house, I sold you a pit. Rabbi Kiva says, the buyer doesn't have to buy a path because obviously when I bought the pit, I bought a path as well. The Harim said, no, I only sold you the pit. You want to walk there? Buy a path.